What do you think?
Yeah.
You think we're pretty good? Okay. All right, well, thanks for being here. I am Sam Simpson and have been a member of this church, I think, since 1992, and I will not use this unless you want me to. Can anybody hear
You
this?
can, we can hear you now.
I heard it say recording like 30 minutes before y'all got here, so there's no telling. I may need that tape, because I made a mistake. But Lisa asked me to teach this class and then told me it was going to be about music, which I had never done before. So this could be a complete disaster, and or it could be really fun. And I struggled with it. So I was telling Jackie earlier, or maybe I was telling you guys, I was out Friday night at a party, and I saw somebody who was a member of the church. I'm like, oh my gosh, I hear you're teaching on music. And I was like, I have no idea what I'm going to do. I have written down 1,000 things, and I have been reading and all this kind of stuff, but it's just like completely a cloud on my mind, which is a lot. It's a great metaphor for music, right? I mean, so, you know, I've tried to write a couple of songs, but it's incredibly difficult, but it's a lot like putting together a lesson like this. In a way, that's exactly kind of what music is. I mean, if you, how many of you play an instrument? I know Sam does. Okay, so a lot of musicians here. Okay, so the first time you pick up that instrument, it's like the most overwhelming thing, right? I mean, you pick up a guitar and you go, okay, I want to play guitar, and you do this, and it sounds terrible, right? And then you try to do things, and it's just not going to work. Same thing with the piano. And so, in a sense, you've got an instrument that seems completely chaotic and offers nothing, and you've got to learn exactly how to bring order to that instrument and to yourself, right, to your hands. And so, to me, we're gonna start talking about the basics of music, and Sam's probably gonna crawl out of here because he's gonna go insane. Because how many of you have studied music theory? Oh gosh, okay. You may not be allowed to talk, Ginger, unless you're just affirming. No, you actually. I invite you, because I've never studied music, right? So I grew up playing guitar. It started when I was 12. I never had a lesson. I never understood anything about music. And then I started playing in a band with Sam and realized that I probably needed to understand what I was doing, or I wasn't going to be able to hang in there with them. And so all this has kind of been new to me, but it's been kind of a fascinating journey. And so I wanted to start off by just kind of reaffirming kind of music and what it is and why it's important to us. Most of you, I think that would be a little bit of a waste of time, because I think you're here, you're musicians, but music is oddly mysterious in so many ways to me, because it is something that is universal in one sense, and it's something that is incredibly individualistic in another sense. I mean, my wife and I don't like the same kind of music, right? I mean, there's some that we like together, but for the most part, I'll be listening to something so you can please turn that. You know, when you listen to that, that is just the worst thing I've ever heard, right? I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. We went to the concert last Saturday in Charlotte, and Billy Strings was playing. He was the first act, and I was just shocked that he was the first act, because I was like, he's a savant. I mean, he is amazing. But he played pretty much kind of bluegrass music, which my wife feels like is like claws going down the shoulder, right? So she hated it. I mean, she was like, oh my gosh, when are the rest of these guys going to start? So, but it doesn't take anything away from the fact that all the musicians were extremely gifted. They're extremely skilled. They've worked really hard to achieve where they are, and their music sounds fantastic. In fact, I would say that I don't know that there's any type of music I don't like. And I think once you kind of get into the why and how of music, it gives you an appreciation for all types of music. And so, you know, clearly it is something that is central to the church, and I will try to get there towards the end. So just kind of be a little bit patient, or give me a little bit of patience. But I tried to kind of break down, and a lot of this was probably stolen from Peter Vanderveen, who, do you know Peter? Y'all read Peter? Okay, yeah. So I'm going to butcher Peter and try to convey what I took away from his writing. But essentially, he has kind of divided music into harmony, melody, and rhythm. Okay, and so to understand each one of those and then put them together is what creates music in his kind of worldview. And I love that because it was very simple. I mean, you take music, you start studying music there, again, never studied it, probably because it's intimidating, and I don't think I would understand it. But for me, this exercise was wonderful. And we started out kind of with harmony, and you know, there are 12 tones. I mean, it's not like there are a million tones out there, right? And especially with the guitar. I mean, so if we take the guitar, you kind of see all these designs on the neck, right? So this is the 12th fret, and they start all over again here. So we've got 12 tones, and you've heard them all. I mean, if he's we're right back where we started. But it's one octave apart, is what we say, okay? So we've got one that sounds a lot higher and one that sounds a little lower, right? And it's interesting, those tones are just frequencies, right? I mean, they're just, I mean, at the end of the day, music is sound is sound waves, and sound waves are governed by frequency like waves in the ocean, right? And if you take the frequency of this and you double it, you get that, it's the same note. So there's something also entirely mathematical about all this, and it's mathematical. So I think that's what was fascinating to me. It's like, we think of music as art, and very subjective, but there's a huge objective piece to it that has to be there, or you're not going to get the subjective, right? You're not going to get the art unless you have hit the math correctly, which is crazy. And we talk about, you know, we just talk about this like sound and pitch and higher frequencies mean higher notes, lower frequencies mean lower notes. And that's just incredibly objective. And I'm kind of working on this column here, so it's clear. I'm not going to get over that yet. And so, but then you've also got to have some structure, right? So if harmony needs structure in order to work, and that starts kind of on an instrument level. I've got to have my instrument tuned, right? And to do that, some people like Sam are probably good enough to do it. And I say Sam, I'm not referring to myself in the third person. If you hear me say Sam, it's Sam again. Okay? Sam can probably tune by ear. I need this, which I attach onto the guitar, and it tells me whether my instrument is in the true note, or playing the true note of E. Because if I'm not and Sam is, it's going to sound terrible, right? And then the player has to also have that structure. So Sam would validate this. We've been in a band where he's been playing an E, which is what you're supposed to be playing. I'm playing an A, and it sounds terrible, right? So that structure has to be there as well. And that goes to everybody in the band. I mean, if we had 7 people in the band and we had one guy who's playing the wrong thing, especially the bass player, we're in trouble, right? It's going to sound terrible. But then it also goes to the composition we're playing, right? I mean, all notes don't go together. All chords don't go together. There's some chords that just belong in the same family, and there's some that don't. And so we have to keep those separate. If we're going to play a song, if we're going to create a song, and we want to create harmony, we've got to have all of this together, okay? Melody is a whole different thing. So melody is when you take these tones and you put them together and they say something. It's like a sentence. The tones are the words, then your melody is going to be the sentence, right? And again, those tones have to go together. I mean, if I'm trying to make sense of what I'm saying to you right now, and it's happening subconsciously, but if we were at the Tower of Babel and I started spouting off things you didn't understand, you'd say, wait, this doesn't make sense. You know, is it that he's speaking a language I don't understand? Is it his words are jumbled? Or we've all seen that. So, in a sense, melody has kind of this objective, subjective component as well, right? When we speak of the tones that go together, we basically say they're scales, right? We've all heard this. And we use these scales to put together tones that belong together in a way that speaks to us, that create pleasing melodies. And I mean, I was trying to explain this to my daughter, and the only way that we could do this was if I just said, okay, oh gosh, do you remember the sound of music? And when she's trying to teach them scales, she plays this wonderful, or she teaches them to sing do, re, mi, right? And I mean, it's one of the most universal examples of how to teach scales. And what she's doing there is she is teaching the major scale to these kids. She's assigning a note to each child. And that's how they learn how to sing. What I think is interesting to me, I'm not sure why I put this on here, but that we have major scales, we have minor scales. And major scales are generally happy. So if you think about music that you think of as really uplifting, happy music, it's normally in a major scale. So a lot of I mean, I love the Grateful Dead. The Grateful Dead will a lot of times play a blues progression, but it's a major blues progression. So it's a really happy song. Whereas if you get into kind of the minor blues guys, as Steve Martin famously said in The Jerk, I like the blues, but they just make me sad. You know, and so there is this amazingly objective but subjective component. I mean, if I play an A minor, it just sounds dark. It makes you want to cry. If I play an A major, it has that brighter, happier. And so to me, getting back to how we're going to string together and say something about music, we don't really want to mix the happy and the sad unless you're going to be extremely careful, which is what gives us the blues. And so, like, what I love about the blues is that the blues is essentially that happy major third rubbing up against a minor third. And it creates this terrible tension, which makes Steve Martin sad. You know, and that's a uniquely American creation. But it just shows you how this objective, subjective work together to create really beautiful, moving pieces. And then in the same way, the chords that I'm playing, so if I play a C chord, I'm really only playing 3 notes, right? So it only takes 3 notes to make any chord. And when you play guitar, you got 6 strings, so you're just playing 3 notes, and each one of them is being played at a different octave. So that's why you have 6 strings, right? You have minor chords, major chords, and all of these have to be in the key scale, right? I mean, they still have to be in that same family. So there's that organizational component, and then you have people like Sam who can actually play lead, and then you've got something special, right? Because we've got the chords in the background, and then we've got, and I really should get Sam up here.
100%.
But if we go back into, just to give you an example of what we're talking about when we're saying major and minor chords, or major and minor progressions, and where major's happening, this is a C major. And this is, I just use blues stuff. It's technically blues, but it's kind of happy, right? Then you juxtapose that with this minor. Same C scale, but it's C minor. I mean, my wife just left me.
The dog.
Went with
The
her.
dog.
it's over, right?
My truck
At this
broke down.
And so, and this is rhythm, right? So, going back to what is a scale, at the end of the day, you know, I always used to go, God, I see somebody like Sam Simpson playing lead. How does he do that? I mean, he's just so high, right? And then I discovered it's really just playing a scale over, right? So if this is a C minor, I mean C major, then and I should get Sam up here or not. It's gonna kill him, okay? But he's just playing a scale. It's just, all he's doing is just playing a scale. So, and he's just bending chords, just giving personality, right? That's it. Now, if you go to a major scale, I mean, that's a major scale, excuse me. If you go to a minor scale, we're not going to sound happy, right? We're going to go back into that blues thing. And again, it's a different
You
scale.
got the handkerchief.
Completely different scale, right? So this, I need to play the minor scale. And it's just a completely different scale, but it's got to have that personality with it, right? But it's a gift to be able to play lead like Sam plays lead. It takes a lot of time, a lot of discipline to do that. But again, is Sam not following the math? Absolutely. So there's a lot of head component here, but there's also a lot of subjective and feeling it. You know, if I just play a chord, it's going to sound terrible, but it's going to. And that gets old, right? So we got to give it some personality. We're really. So, it's, to me, that is what is fascinating about we've got subjective and this subjective component to music. If you don't have both, it's a disaster, right? And then the last piece, my last column over here, which I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on because I think it's so obvious, is the third component. You got to have rhythm, right? I mean, we did not have a drummer when we were playing the other day, and it was a little bit tough. Michael Sherrill normally plays drummer with us. He's an incredible drummer, and he was at Parents Weekend and was not there, and it was tough. I mean, we were all trying to figure out when to come in, when the song is over. The drummer that Sam and I played with, Fred Black, is a master drummer. I mean, so when we are changing chords, he'll kind of give you this little, and you know you're getting ready to go into a different chord. I don't even have to think about it. I don't have to count when I'm playing with Fred Black because he is telling me everywhere I'm going with that rhythm. He's coordinating the entire band. He's coordinating the vocals, and that to me is what makes it a gifted drummer, is that rhythm is almost taken for granted. You don't even have to think about it. I'm not sitting there going, okay, how many measures have we gone through on this? Do I need to switch? What do I need to do? Even when you're playing a lead, you can get lost in playing a lead, but when it's time to get out of that lead, Freddie's going to give you a little, and you're going to know, okay, it's over. I gotta get off this. So, what I love about this is that, and that's a lot. I mean, really, are there questions or comments? I mean, I'm trying to run through this because I feel like we're at 10:30, but I don't want to limit comments or questions. But understanding music theory through these three columns, to me, makes a great deal of sense, right? So, why is this interesting and why are we talking about church, right? So that's the big question. So, and that's really where kind of I started working towards figuring out, okay, how am I going to relate this to our spiritual lives, to the church, to us as individuals? What does this mean? And in the end, it just kind of started becoming obvious to me that music theory and divine order are like completely inseparable. And I think there are times where your eyes are opened and you see God's fingerprints in creation where you didn't think you were going to see them. And all of a sudden you're like, wow, I don't really need to sit down with philosophers and discuss whether God exists or not, or I think therefore I am, blah, 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 all this stuff, right? You just see it and you know it. I mean, like holding a newborn baby, holding any baby, by the way. You see God's fingerprints all over that. And for me, the more I learned about music theory, I mean, it's kind of creepy. But I mean, you've got 3s, 7s, and 12s everywhere in music. I mean, you cannot understand music without 3s, 7s, and 12s. And so, we talk about these three: harmony, melody, rhythm. Your chord tones are 3 notes. Your scales, your natural scales are made up of 7 notes, right? You've got 12 tones to choose from. I mean, we could go forever. I mean, like, what are some examples of 3s in the Bible, in our spiritual life? Anyone?
The Holy Trinity.
The Holy Trinity. I mean, it's the most obvious, right? I mean, it's crazy. And so, what I love about Peter Van der Veen is he basically said, let's try to understand harmony, melody, and rhythm through that lens. And how does the divine triune work itself into that? And so, and again, I'm totally stealing from him because I thought this was fascinating. Melody comes out of harmony, which is greater. So he looks at melody as being the Son, as being Jesus. Harmony as being the Father or God. Melody is harmony made personal. And kind of the easiest way for me to understand from a music standpoint is if I play that blues progression for you with no lead, it's not personal. And there's really nothing to it. What makes great music to me is the ability for somebody to play lead over that and to make it personal. And our greatest guitarists were masters at it, right? There are very few guitarists that are famous for their rhythm, right? Oh my God, he was the best rhythm guitarist I can't wait to just listen to him all day, right? No, I mean, the people that we love are the people who imbue harmony with melody. It makes it personal, right? And then rhythm is really like the Spirit, the Holy Spirit. It's like this force that is there. We know it. It's giving order and urgency, power and joy to our music. And it's like this omnipresent coordinator, right? So when we hear great compositions, to me, that's what we don't really have to know all this stuff. I mean, it'd be great if we could kind of recall all this kind of stuff, but it almost ruins it, right? I mean, when you hear Bach, you kind of feel like you're holding that baby. You feel like you're seeing God's fingerprints all over something. And the reason we're seeing that is partly what's on the back of the board, but it's really God's reflection in the world, which is what kind of, every time I usually teach a class, I usually just say, okay, what is your role as a Christian in this world? Your role is to reflect God, right? I mean, that's what, first thing they say in Genesis, okay, let's make man in our presence, or in our image. And so, like, at the end of the day, that's kind of what it is. I mean, it's like God needs some mirror walking around the world reflecting. And some do it wonderfully, some don't do it at all, some do it poorly, right? And it's not something that just happens. It's not something that we can just say, okay, golly, I'm a human, I must be reflecting God's image perfectly, right? It still takes a lot of the work on the backside of the board. It still takes a lot of study, it takes a lot of coordination, it takes a lot of harmony. You know, your instrument has to be in tune, right, personally. If you're going to create harmony with others, then they have to be in tune. We've got to be working on something together that is coordinated, that belongs together. I mean, one of my favorite analogies, I can't remember where I heard this from, and somebody was trying to explain divine purpose for the human being, and the guy's like, well, you know, you could drive your lawnmower to work every day, but that's not what it's for, right? And a lot of times you're doing things you're not designed for. You can do them, absolutely. That's not what you're designed to do. And so that harmony has to come out of realizing what our gifts are, what we are created to do, coordinating that with others, and having that overall omniscient coordinator and being, you know, if I just put on headphones and didn't listen to Freddie playing drums and just went off on my own, I might be really talented, but it's going to sound terrible, right? So we've got to have that coordination. And to me, you know, from a spiritual analogy, starting with your instrument, going to your own skills, going to the skills of who you're playing with, and going to the composition you're playing, it's a perfect analogy. You know? And we all should be asking ourselves, like, hey, what are we doing here? You know, are we making good music or are we making bad music? And it's usually pretty obvious, right? I've listened to some really bad bands. We have two. I'm sure Jill has like looked around and said, "There's some bad bands in this church. So like, you know, we got to get some coordination going here." You know, I mean, Whitney loved to read her diary when she first came to the church, and like was looking at all the committees and all the Sunday school classes and the way worship was going and all that. And so, you know, in a sense, it relates to us on pretty much every level. And then the last thing that kind of struck me is this wonderful mix of the need to be objectively correct and abstractly or subjectively beautiful. And to me, that is faith, right? I mean, I think, you know, you encounter some people who are like, you know what, I don't want to get into all that, you know, like how the books are ordered in the Bible and why they are in the history of the Bible and what the politics were at the time and all that kind of stuff. Hey, I just know. I'm just spiritually embedded. And I'm jealous of that, but that's not me. I mean, so, like when Jesus, you know, says things like, if you want to follow me, you have to disown your father and your mother. I got to understand what that means. Because I love my mother and my father, right? You know, like I was like, wait, that doesn't make any dang sense. Well, it does if you put it within the context of what was happening. You know, at the time, the culture, they were training their kids to basically be terrorists against the Romans. It's very similar to kind of what's happening today in the Middle East. You know, you've got a lot of parents that are training the kids to do very bad things. And it would be like if a Palestinian leader stood up and said, hey, if a Jewish soldier asked you to carry his machine gun, carry your machine gun. You know, if someone strikes you on the cheek, offer them the other cheek. How does that make sense? Because everything you've been taught is totally different. And then he goes, well, if you want to follow my way, you have to leave your mother, you have to deny your mother and father. Well, now it makes sense. Okay, I got it. So, to me, there's a lesson in music in that we kind of have to have both in order to coordinate. We've got the subjective structure that we all have to understand, but we've also got nothing, if if we don't have the aesthetic and the beauty and the spirit and the passion in what we do, right? I mean, there's some really technically correct musicians who sound terrible. And then there are a lot of old blues guys who don't know anything on that board who sound better than anybody, right? And there's a spiritual analysis in that, in the way that we encounter believers. So, I think there was a great quote in here, and I'm gonna try to kind of wrap up here with that if I can find it. But basically, I'm so far off my schedule here. But it was a great quote. It was really, all right, so you can't do a Sunday school class without reading the Bible verse, right? So this is Paul in Romans 1:20. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power, his divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. Isn't that music? Everybody goes, I don't want to see God. Well, you're not listening to music, right? You're not seeing God in that. People who talk about being born again say, okay, all of a sudden everything makes sense. Like my life was complete pandemonium. And then all of a sudden it was like there was an order to everything. Everything made sense. I knew what I was supposed to be doing. Like this was amazing to me. And I think it's that opening of the eyes. And finally saying, okay, I've been listening to music my whole life, but I never knew that in order for Bach to produce this, he was doing complex math in the background, but yet making something gorgeous. The quote that I cannot find is essentially, I was going to attribute it to the writer, but essentially he said, and he was kind of taking Rene Descartes' I think, therefore I am proposition, and but essentially he said, I've listened to Bach, therefore I believe in God. And I think it's that obvious. If you want to believe in that, if you want to understand that music is more than just sound waves pulsating that randomly have been put together, and we've just tried so many times with so many different tones, but finally Bach got it right. It's not it at all. And it's not that way with creation, right? I mean, if we believe that God started with total chaos and nothingness and created this beautiful order, is music not just the most amazing metaphor for that? So that's my take on music theory and divine order. Did it make sense, or does it? Yes.
One thing that, when you were talking about Fred Black not being able to play the drums, it made me feel that in the body of Christ there are many parts.
Yes.
And every part has got a place. And so in your heart, you are a guitarist. And you are the
lead guitarist.
The lead guitarist.
The lead
but Fred, it's important to also have every part of the puzzle. But the part, like the drummer, when Michael wasn't able to be there, his part was very important, and everybody completes the entire picture.
Everybody's always all about Michael because he's singing, right? Saying this isn't fair. We are just as important in the body of believers, but everybody hears Michael, and Michael's engaging with the audience.
But you're using your talents in a way to celebrate God and love, but it's also that everybody's working together. Everybody's part's important.
And that's, in a sense, what the church is, right?
Takes them all.
Yeah, so I mean,
takes them all.
If you think about it, the church is kind of the band, right?
Yeah.
And like poor John Lilly, who plays bass, nobody ever says, John, you had a great night. But if you quit playing, you're dead.
Oh, the bass.
That's all you really hear. You just don't really acknowledge that you're listening. So, in the same way that, like I'm on the property committee. How great is that? Everybody talks about a great deal of the property committee. Look at those. Everything's clean out there. If y'all notice?
Yeah.
But Tim Mills, without Tim, this church is like a band without a bass. right? And so we all, and Tim is incredible, I'm gonna pick on Tim, because Tim's incredibly talented. But Tim's not gonna get up there and preach, and deliver a sermon that everybody's gonna go home talking about. But everybody's walking by everything Tim's been doing day in and day out, right? So, but it's a great metaphor for the church, absolutely. And I think that's, if you go back to getting into the political side of Jesus, that was his whole message. He's like, hey guys, I'm walking around here, and you guys have totally forgotten. You're supposed to be God's messengers. You're supposed to be telling the world how wonderful God is and how there's a divine purpose to their creation and how they should be loving each other and helping each other and being God's image in the earth, on earth. And you've forgotten that. And what are you doing? You're trying to kill people. All you care about is land. You want the temple back. I don't care about the temple. And the temple's so terrible, I could turn over the cash register, the money table, and it stops functioning. Does that tell you it's about spirituality or money? It's about, and that was the whole purpose of that action. It's basically, this is a joke. This temple is just like a big grocery store, right? So he's screaming that, and he's like, okay, the only way that this is gonna survive is if they start playing a different tune, to use a terrible analogy, and they start feeding the hungry, caring for the sick, loving their enemies, working through humility to serve others, right? Because if you do that, the Romans aren't going to kill you. But if you don't do that, and you keep doing what your parents are telling you to do, then in 70 AD, there were 1,000 crucifixes lining up going into Jerusalem for Passover with Jews hanging on them, basically saying, keep it up, keep it up. And they did keep it up. And what happens? The temple gets destroyed. Jews are thrown all over the world. The Jewish race is almost extinguished, right? But where are the Christians? The Christians are all out in the mountains in these little communities, these little bands, playing a different tune. And what happens? They survive. So that music sells. The other music doesn't sell. So, how about that for turning it into a historical lesson, right? So, all right, well, thank you guys.
Thank you.
I know I got a good comedian too, so appreciate it. Okay.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you very much. See you next week. Yeah, yeah. Okay. See you.